The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy Nyer, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC. I will be your facilitator for today's webinar. For those of you who are not familiar, the Virginia SBDC is the largest and most effective provider of customized counseling and education for small businesses in Virginia. Most of our services are offered locally in 28 locations throughout the Commonwealth. Today's webinar is one of our educational offerings and is part of our ongoing webinar series, Google and Beyond, Marketing and Managing on the Web. Given that this month is Cybersecurity Month, today's topic is backing up your business data on the web. All of your Google and Beyond webinars are presented by Ray Sidney Smith, a web and mobile strategist, author of So Low Most Success, Social Media, Local and Web Small Business Marketing Strategy Explained, and president of W3 Consulting. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type those questions into the question window and Ray will do his best to answer them. Without further ado, here's Ray Sidney Smith.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to the Virginia SBDC Network for having me here on this webinar series. As Tracy said, now is the time to ask questions. Feel free to, and I'll be happy to answer those. I will have my email address on the final slide, so you can certainly email me subsequent to the webinar. If you have questions that you need answering, feel free to tweet at me at W3 Consulting, hashtag it beyond Google, and I'll know that it's about the webinar series, and I'll be happy to answer your questions out there on the Twitter sphere as well. I know Twitter is testing the increased number of the increased character length on Twitter, so maybe you can write a longer message than usual. Some people have access to the longer tweets or not, and then of course follow at Virginia SBDC for updates on future programs like this, as well as other resources and programs that are provided for the small businesses throughout Virginia. So feel free to follow at Virginia SBDC. Today, we are going to be talking about backing up your business data on the web. And this is such an important topic that I hope you all get something out of. And the primary message is that you need to back up your data, right? And I'll be talking a little bit about why you should back up your data. There are some really compelling reasons. I'm going to want to sort of deep dive into some of those so that you have an understanding about why. And then I'm going to talk about how. How you should back up your data, giving you the options necessary, the options available to you, that is, so that you're able to make the best decision about which types of backups and how often those should be made. And finally, I'm going to give you some of the software services solutions that are available for small business so that you're able to go out there and make it happen. All right, I'll leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. Just about a minute to 30 seconds is probably all the time we'll have left by the time I've gone through this material, but by all means, I'll stay as long as we need to answer questions with Tracy, okay? So, why back up your data? I think a lot of people have this overarching question about why data should be backed up, and there are really 4 fundamental reasons why small business should really focus on data backup. Number 1 is that natural disasters happen. We talk about Harvey, Irma, Maria. Those are just 3 hurricanes of, I believe, 6 that are here in the 2017 hurricane season. And that's just hurricanes with over 260 billion dollars in damage, just from 3 hurricanes touching the coast and a few islands off the coast in the Atlantic Ocean. We are going to see more hurricanes happen just in this season, and it's not the end of hurricanes that I know of. We're going to see more tropical storms, and we're going to see other kinds of natural disasters, tornadoes in the middle parts of the country. We have all kinds of natural disasters that happen. The water slides, we have these flash floods. Things happen, and those natural disasters affect your data. They affect your businesses. And in the Alexandria area, when Hurricane Isabel came through, I believe it was, it did catastrophic damage to the coastal line there of Virginia, and battered those small businesses. So really understand that natural disasters are something that you should really be prepared for when it comes to data backup. It's the number 1 reason why small businesses, are affected when it comes to business data loss. And then of course, it comes down to what happens after that. Do you do you survive as a business after this natural disaster, or do you go out of business? And we know from statistics that a good majority of the small businesses that have a natural disaster happen, the effects of those end up being business failure. They don't bounce back as much. And I think if they had their data backed up, that would put them at least one step closer to being able to be more resilient to natural disasters. Second is human errors. Human errors are not just those. I try to keep this from the perspective that I think the best of people. And so, it does run the gamut, though, of the fact that, you or your staff may make mistakes. You may drop a computer, drop a phone. You may delete a very important file, or say all of your files. All kinds of errors can happen. And that's not even taking into account things of a malicious nature, where you may have a disgruntled ex-employee or a disgruntled current employee who, and it doesn't even have to be an employee. It could be a vendor. It could be a friend. It could be any number of people in your life where these types of human interventions happen because many times as a small business owner, your data is on hardware that is shared or at least accessible to a lot of other people in your life that maybe it wouldn't be accessible in a corporate or enterprise environment. So be very, very conscientious about the fact that these kinds of human errors happen, and sometimes they are malicious. Again, I don't want to point fingers, but really be aware of that. Next up is that technology fails, and hardware is hardware, and many times a hard drive is a hard drive, and it works until it doesn't. Every product in the world has what's called an MTBF, a mean time before failure, and that's the average time, and in a mean average of how long it will take before your product fails. Every piece of technology has that. So your computer, your hard drive inside your computer, the screen on your computer, the power source on your computer, and on your phone and on your tablets, on your point of sale systems, all of them have a mean time before failure. So it's not if, but when it will fail, and how catastrophic is going to be the data loss if you haven't backed it up. So just be aware that technology fails. We have power surges that happen. And more importantly, what we call browning. Browning is when electrical supply actually dips below the appropriate level to power something, but doesn't actually cut it off. This is actually very dangerous to computer systems and to the power supplies available to them, as well as the hard drives and processors that are running on them. If you don't have surge protection, which so many businesses do not have, or you're in a Main Street district that has older electrical infrastructure, that browning, that constant dipping below the acceptable levels to properly power your computers, actually lowers the life expectancy of your technology. Okay, so be aware of that, and that's just a sort of first recommendation, is to go out there and get some what are called line conditioners, or USBs, which are universal supply batteries, or these kinds of surge protectors and so on and so forth that provide clean power to the devices that are running. Okay, but technology failures happen, and you want to make sure that when they happen, you have backup. And then there's the big fourth one that gets a lot of attention, and rightfully so, because the fact of the matter is that cyber attacks are happening, they have happened, and they will continue. I'll just go over a couple of them so that you get the impact of what we're really dealing with here. Starting in February, Cloudflare, the company that provides a CDN, or a content distribution network, basically an ability to host your site in multiple different distribution servers around the world so that people who are closer to those servers are able to access your website in order to have a faster experience. Cloudflare was told by a Google vulnerability expert, a security vulnerability expert, about a vulnerability called Cloud Bleed. And so in February, they immediately patched it, but this actually left open and vulnerable quite a bit of data regarding businesses and other people's websites. Fast forward to April, and shadow brokers, a hacker agency, a hacker group, this mysterious clandestine group, released alleged NSA data. Well, guess what was in that NSA data? Probably data that NSA was collecting about not only foreign people, but also nationals and citizens. They were collecting all kinds of data they are collecting all kinds of data, right? So potentially data about you is being released via these hacker groups. We then fast forward to April. April had WannaCry, the big ransomware. And ransomware is a way in which a cyber attacker goes in and captures your data, moves it to some place where they've secured it, or they somehow encrypt it on your own system, so they have the password and you have to give them money in order to get back access to your computer or to your data. And this particular WannaCry ransomware seemingly was championed or inspired or devised by the North Korean government, and wasn't actually as effective because it was capable of being shut down. But the problem with that is that now WannaCry, the software itself, the ransomware itself, is available, and it affects something called the SMBv1, which is a send messaging tool that's built into not almost every version of Windows. Some of it's been deprecated, or at least V1 has been deprecated, but the reality is that your computer is vulnerable to this if it hasn't been affirmatively patched by either you or Microsoft or otherwise. So you should certainly check it and check whether it's out there. The vast majority of the risk is gone, but you should really pay attention to the fact that there's this thing that's sort of floating out there. June came with Petya, which is known by a bunch of names, not Petya, Netya, GoldenEye, and that was a targeted cyber attack on the Ukrainian government. And then we have the worst of them. These are just terrible. So Equifax tells us that 1 in 2 Americans, basically, if we were all sitting in a room together today, if you looked left or you looked right, one of you was hacked. One of your data, one of your information, one of your data sets with Equifax, one of the 3 big, credit reporting agencies, allowed the release of your social security number, your name, address, potentially credit card information. 145.5 million Americans and Canadians' information was taken in some way, shape, or form. Now, the people who are investigating this all think that, for the most part, this was a Chinese-focused attack and was looking for a very specific individual's information. But that's still no reason why you shouldn't be concerned, and you should reach out to Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian and make sure that you put either a fraud alert or lock your account in some way, shape, or form. There's lots of information out there on the internet today about what should be done in the face of Equifax's leak. Then we have Yahoo. Yahoo just announced yesterday, or at least it was announced yesterday. I'm not sure how the chain of information was released, but 3 billion users, all of Yahoo's users, including their email service, Tumblr, and Flickr, and their email service covers their Yahoo small business, which included their website and email hosting servers. So that included small business owners. In 2013, that was 4 years ago, all of their accounts were in some way, shape, or form hacked. That was names, email addresses, and passwords. Well, password, security is pretty low bar, and people have a tendency to make passwords called password, and so that gives people a huge vulnerability. So if you have a Yahoo account, please go out there and change your password. At least change your password. So that's a big vulnerability. 3 billion people, 3 billion users, not people. And then finally, 198 million voter records were exposed by a conservative data firm back in June. And so 198 million voters, that's 2/3 of the American population, their information was exposed to the web through this sort of oversight, not securing or misconfiguring a server by this data firm. So I'm kind of scaring you here on purpose, right? There's a lot of cybersecurity hacks happening, cyber attacks happening, and while this isn't a cybersecurity or a cyber resilience focused webinar, you should really be paying attention to this. And I presume in the future we'll probably do a cybersecurity or cyber resilience focused webinar, but I really want you to pay attention to this. Gets a lot of public discourse, and you get a lot of media attention on this. And note that what I targeted in terms of the items that I mentioned, those are primarily ones that affected the Ukrainian government or clandestine or state-sponsored, hackers and that kind of thing. But you know what? Most targets of these hackings are small businesses, not big business, not state governments. They are targeting you. Why? Because it flows under the radar, right? If you think about the way in which today the internet has democratized many things, it has allowed for this vast ability for you to collect $1 from a lot of many people and get to $1 million, as opposed to collecting large sums of money from a few people, right? And that means you can sell online small amounts. Well, hackers recognize this, and they know that small businesses aren't protecting themselves, and so they go after them, and those don't become headline news because we're small businesses. We're not big stories. And it's not happening in a vast number, coordinated. It's happening by lone wolf attackers, that are strategically looking at hacking specific systems. And so it flies under the radar, but it's happening. And I know it's happening because I get the emails, I get the phone calls, I get the tears, and the crying from systems being compromised because of poor password security, not having backups, not having the appropriate cybersecurity in mind. So I really just want to press home the importance of this. I think it's a very important topic, and this is why you should have a backup. Okay, I hope I've made a convincing argument. All right, that said, let's now talk about what data should be backed up. And I want to go over some of the important functions and factors for being able to do this, because many times this is a very confusing sort of panoply. But what I'm going to be talking about for the most part is actually several different types of backup. All right, we're going to be talking about what's considered offline backup. That is backup that is happening not on the internet, right? It's happening locally on your system. So we'll call that local or an offsite backup. And then we're going to be talking about online or cloud backup. Okay, and I'll use those two terms interchangeably. And in the sense, that is data that is being moved from your local systems up to your online, some kind of online storage, whether that be storage you control or storage that somebody else is handling for you. Okay, and there's actually a combination of backups that are necessary. So for example, a backup is not you making a copy of a document and putting it in another folder on your same computer. Right? So if I'm working on a document, I'm like, oh, this is a really, I'm working on a book right now. And so I'm writing this book. And so if I make a copy of it and put it in another folder in my documents file, folder on my computer, that is not a backup. Okay? That's just another copy. So yes, if the current version of the document somehow corrupts, I have another copy, but that is not a backup. Okay? Backing up means that you are able to restore from that backup when stuff hits the fan, okay? And that includes hacking, cyber attacks. That means ransomware. That means failure of the computer, natural disaster, and so on and so forth. If my computer's sitting in my office and a hurricane hits it, right, and destroys that particular device, 2 copies of the same file on that computer is not going to save me. Or if I'm in a cafe and I'm using my computer and somebody steals the laptop from me, runs off with it, they grab my bag and run off with my laptop, well, that backup is not going to save me. That additional file is not going to save me, okay? So we're actually talking about multiple types of backup, the combination of those. That's what we're really talking about when we talk about backup, okay? We want to be able to deal with not only on-site disasters, with local backup, but also off-site storage of that data just in case of on-site data loss that's catastrophic. All right, so what data should you be backing up? First and foremost, people attempt to back up everything, okay? And that is the wrong strategy. You collect a lot of data about yourself. You don't realize it, but companies that you are, vendors of your company, your devices that you're using, there is a lot of data that is being collected about you that is kind of random and useless, and you don't want to collect all of that data. So you do need to be strategic but thorough regarding what you back up. All right, so this is not a specific recommendation, but more a generalized view that as you make your way forward through the discussion we're going to be having, I want you to just be aware that you are going to now start thinking, do I need this data in the future? Okay, and so the specific recommendation here is to make a list. Start making a list of where these data points, these files and folders, and if you have a photo database somewhere, if you have a particular set of point of sale data, say credit card data or other kinds of data about your clients, where do you keep that data? Make a list of it so that you can start to check off what and how you're going to back up that data in the first place. Because many people just go ahead and say, oh, well, I just have to back up everything. And that's really not useful, because at the end of the day, what you're going to do is you're going to subject yourself to data overload. You're going to be hosting way more data than you need to, which means you probably have to pay someone to host all of that data, or you'll be paying to keep backups of this stuff in much larger cases. And you're actually susceptible to larger data corruption, because backups, when you encrypt something, you expose yourself to encryption algorithms that could potentially corrupt. And the smaller the files, the more lean they are, the less likely you are to have an issue with it going forward. Okay, so I like the idea of actually encrypting those backups, and we'll get to this in a little bit, in separate files. So I don't lose everything all at once if for some reason something doesn't decrypt. Okay, so keep that in mind. Be strategic but thorough. You should have a list of everything. All right, next is that you should have at least your vital data backed up to hard storage. And what I mean by hard storage is a physical disk of some kind, whether that be CD, DVD, or what are now called M disks, which are a high capacity, multi-layer, 1,000-year survival rate, which are heat and moisture resistant disks that you can store large amounts of data on. Okay, and so hard storage is, like I said, a physical disk. So that could be flash storage drive. It could be a spinning disk hard storage device like a NAS or other kinds of tools, and then hard disks like CD-ROM, DVD, M disks, and so on and so forth. And you're actually going to take those hard disks, and at least every few months, take them off site. Okay? So I usually tell the story here of an attorney that I had been acquainted with was in a group of others that we were all talking about issues that were affecting legal practices around the city and that kind of thing. And he told us this story, which was that one day he was sort of feeling the pride of having set up this very sophisticated backup solution in his office. And so he set up this backup solution, and it was his computer and his backup hard drives. I think he had 1 or 2 hard drives that he had set up to redundantly back up his systems. And so he set this up. He got up and went to the bathroom, came back, and someone had stolen his computer and 2 hard drives that had his entire law practice data on it. Okay, it's just a matter of reality that you must move things to offsite, because the reality is that people will steal things, people will damage things in the location. You'll have natural disasters that happen in and around your retail or your office space or wherever you transact business. So you must keep things in multiple locations. Okay, and that's just part of the reality of it. The important function here is that you do this. You don't have to do this every day, okay, because that can be overwhelming, but you really want to do this at least every few months to get that data offsite. Okay. Next up, what is actually included in that hard storage? All right, and so this is really important because you don't have to back up everything to that hard storage. What you really want in hard storage are your local and cloud files that, again, you've made a list of either the most important, the vital few local and cloud files that are necessary. So today people use Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, and many other cloud storage services. Those are not backup. Okay, again, those are redundancies. So in the case of Google Drive or Dropbox or OneDrive, that actually keeps files in 2 different places, right? It keeps files synchronized with your cloud server, right, which is either Google or Dropbox or OneDrive, Microsoft or otherwise, and your local file. And it's synchronizing them, meaning that when I delete something from one location, it deletes it in the other place. That's not backup. That's not even redundancy. That's just synchronization. Okay, and that allows for convenience of having those files on multiple computers. Do not think that that is storage or backup. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. So you want to decide on what local and cloud files need to be moved to your hard storage for offsite backup. Next up is client data. Now this is really important for you to take into account, especially when it comes to litigation and client privacy data and all of the various other rules and regulations and laws that surround how to hold, keep, retain, and protect your client data. So only keep the client data that you need to keep. So you must go ahead and decide what is the client data that I need and what's the data retention policy that we're going to set into place to keep that data. Okay, and this flows forward to my next item, which are your passwords. So you should of course have strong passwords, all right, but you should also keep and maintain a database of those. I highly recommend using a software. The three major ones are LastPass, Dashlane, and 1Password, the number 1Password. And those three password managers allow you to be able to put all of your passwords in there, and then you have a single omni password that allows you into that software to access it, which you should never lose. So you should write that down on physical paper, maybe laminate it and put it into your into a safe or a safe deposit box somewhere in case you do forget it. But you want to make sure that you have a password manager so that your small business is secure. You're capable of securely sharing this password information with your staff or potentially third parties who are acting on your behalf. Many people use freelancers, especially virtual assistants who need access to your information, and just handing them your password is not appropriate. Okay, I hate to be strong here, but I have to be. You should not just be handing out your Twitter password or handing out your Facebook password to virtual assistants or your Google account information. Do not give that stuff away in such easy fashion. Use a tool like LastPass or 1Password or Dashlane to be able to securely share that information with those people, and that way they're only given access to be able to utilize that access through the tool. Okay, so you're giving some amount of protection to yourself about what kinds of passwords are being used and how it's being used. Okay, so that should be backed up somewhere. And in the case of passwords, you want to, like for me, I use LastPass, and I adore LastPass. It's a great tool, and I download the entire LastPass database. I encrypt it in a zip file, and I'm potentially a little bit more aggressive about this than others, but I then encrypt it inside of a special compressed file. It's not zip, but it's something similar to it, and I then put that onto my hard disk. So you would need to be able to break the encryption on the compressed file. You then need to know that it was a LastPass file. Then even if you didn't, if you were to attempt to import it into LastPass, you would need my main LastPass password. You need to crack that, and there's just a lot that you would have to do. It would take many years for a person to go ahead and do that, like maybe 100,000 years. So I feel secure in knowing that data is protected in that way. You should too. Passwords are so important today. So much of your life is digital. You need to make sure it's password protected. And finally, software databases. And so many of us run specific kinds of software for our business. You might have very specific types of accounting software. Like your QuickBooks database if you have QuickBooks. And again, this all I'm talking about in terms of cloud databases as well. So all software you use, you should be able to download those databases and keep them separately. So you should pay attention to that. So if you have QuickBooks, you should be able to download your QuickBooks file, or export your QuickBooks file, or save it in some way, shape, or form. The same thing across the board. If you use any specialty types of software databases, you should go ahead and save those also to hard disk. Okay. Again, we're encrypting each of these separately, so we're just going ahead and most. If you have Windows or Mac OS X computer, all you're doing is just right-click on it and then go ahead and archive and set a password. Okay, so there's no fancy software necessary in order to be able to do this. You should be able to encrypt all of this utilizing just your desktop software. Okay. Everything else then, other than that which you're saving to hard disk, every few months, everything else should be automated through your backup utilities. Okay, and that means you should be utilizing software on your systems that can go ahead and do that. And this makes it really easy for most businesses, as long as you have, in this case, I use external hard drives that are connected to my devices to be able to do that. So you have to remember that if you take your computer, your laptop, for example, away from your office on the regular, that when you come back, you either dock it if you have a dock for your laptop, or that you plug in the external hard drive that is running your backup. And most systems, once you set up a backup, it'll prompt you and say, by the way, Ray, you haven't backed up in 12 days. You should really plug in and do that. And that's just a helpful reminder that you do not want to ignore. Okay, so don't get notification fatigue and start to think, oh yeah, I'll just do it tomorrow, and I'll do it tomorrow, because luck will have it that, you know, tomorrow will come, and when you haven't done it, it will have been that time when that really important file you needed was not backed up and something compromising happens to your data. Okay, so just when you get those prompts, plug it in and just have it run in the background. How often you actually do these automated backups depends, and it depends on a number of different things, but primarily the metric I use is how recent do you need a file to be if you need to restore from that backup. Okay, so there are particular items, for example, with our web services, you know, where we do WordPress hosting and other kinds of things, our data that we host for clients locally inside my office is very limited. It's almost zero. So we don't really need that information. You know, it's like, you know, what their web domain address is, and, you know, maybe the name of the company and the project name. Well, if we lost that, that wouldn't be terrible. You know, that wouldn't be particularly bad. I have that list backed up in other places, and if maybe we lost a week's worth of data, it's not going to ruin my day. Okay, it'll be an inconvenience, but we could totally handle that. I could talk to various staff, and we could reassemble the list just from memory of the last week's worth of clients. Okay, but we have other types of data systems that are absolutely critical, right? Our accounting software, for example, we need that to be updated to the day, right? And so that's something that we then incrementally back up much more often. So again, going back to that list of what data do I have about myself, and make a list of it, and I'm going to give you some clues in terms of where that data may live in a bit, and then go item by item and say, okay, this needs to be a part of the, you know, on-site backup, and it needs to be backed up this often, and then this needs to be backed up off-site and this often. Okay, and that's going to happen for each particular item. For me, this is me personally, so I'm not using this as necessarily an archetype, but you can if you want to. I do it this way. For all of my automated backups, I do daily incrementals, which means that it doesn't back up the entire thing every time. It just takes what's new and appends it to the stuff that's old. Okay, so it just says, okay, what did I find new? And this is all within the software that I'll talk about later on, but it says, okay, what's new? And let me just attach the new stuff to the old stuff. Okay, it just keeps doing that and just keeps adding the new stuff to the old stuff. And that's just done while I'm sleeping. It's all automated to happen when I'm not using the computer, and it happens. Okay, and that means I leave my system on so that it's able to do that, or in my case, that means you leave it on and have it do it, or you can actually set up your system. Windows and Mac both have these power features to say, wake only for this, and then go back to sleep. Okay, and that way you can limit your time online. For someone to be, you know, meddling with your computer, you can actually have your computer turn on only for that and then shut off afterward. I do a weekly full offsite cloud. Again, this is automated, and that means I'm taking all of the data on the systems through this automated tool, and it's taking all the data across all of the computers in the company, okay, and it's pushing it up to the cloud. Okay, and it's putting it into a cloud service that's specialized for it. It automatically encrypts the data and secures it for those purposes, and it actually versions it for us. In our case, it has multiple versions so that I'm able to go back and say, oh, you know what, we had deleted this file between this week and that week, and so let's go back to the week prior to pull that file that may have been accidentally deleted in the current week's backup. Okay, and then finally, we have the quarterly offsite. and I'm not going to tell you who I send my quarterly offsite to, but I send it to someone that I trust, that I know and trust to hold this data. And even more importantly, it's physically inside of a locked box, so that individual doesn't have physical access to the data because it's inside of a locked box. But whenever I see this person, or when I ship it to this person, it has all that data that I need, and it's a multi-terabyte hard drive that just takes all of that important data, puts it on there, encrypts it. Again, like I said from the earlier slides, each of these is in its own encrypted backup, because I don't want a corrupted encrypted file to lose all of my data all at once. So if it kills one database, it kills one database. But for the most part, encryption today isn't really all that dangerous. But I like to lessen my risks. So I have separate encrypted backups of each of these various things, and as I said before, the client data from my local and cloud files, and all those other things, that's quarterly. So it's just 4 times a year. It's not that big of a deal for me to do that. Every time I know, oh, you know what, I'm going to visit so-and-so, let me do the backup. And so I have 2 hard drives. This is important also. So I have 2 hard drives for that quarterly, right? Because I'm swapping them. So I have one on site and I do the backup, and that one's put into our safe. So we have a physical safe where that sits, which is fireproof and waterproof, so that it should be able to withstand something pretty strong hitting it, and also from someone potentially coming in and trying to steal it from theft. But every quarter, I just hook it up to the systems. It does a full download. I actually use our full offsite cloud service to push that data down to that offsite local hard drive. Then I separate the data, delete what I don't want saved, encrypt it, and then put it back on the drive, or leave it on the drive, that is. And now it's all set. Put it in this little lockbox case, and then I head off to go see this person. And when I see them, we swap out the A and B, and then it's done. Okay. And for a lot of people, that's a lot of work, but it's just become part of my routine. And I know that if something happens to my business in terms of data loss, I have it. So, if you want to say the same thing, I highly recommend that you do that. So that's just one way in which you can do things. Not everybody needs to do this, but I just feel like, it's good to have an idea of what is happening. Okay, so as far as automated backups go, the data that I typically recommend clients go ahead and back up are the following. Your website. So many businesses don't have a backup of their website. They presume that their web hosting provider, their web hosting service, is doing that. And some do. For example, we at Web Services, we have a regular incremental backup of our clients' websites that we guide them through setting up when they set up their WordPress websites. But not every host does that. And so if you do not have a backup of your website, then you need one. Also, if for some reason you don't secure your website and someone is able to hack in or get access, it doesn't have to be, like I said, it could be human error. Someone could literally, in your company or a vendor or a third party that you've hired to do something, they could go in and accidentally wipe out your HTML directory and just delete all of your website files. And do you have a backup of that locally? Well, you should. So make sure that you automate that. There are lots of different automation tools out there that can go to your website, grab the backup, and just automate it into the system so you have a backup of your website. You do not want to be without your website for weeks or months while you try to recreate the data, especially like, for example, my website that's years and years old. It has data upon data that I don't want to recreate that stuff. And that's the only place it lives. I don't have it in a local place except in our backups. But I don't want to keep it in multiple places. It's on the website for a reason, so it's publicly accessible. So website database. Next are a whole host of things that I've already talked about, but I want to cover them again in just in some of the more important factors. Email. You should have an email retention policy. You should not back up all of your email. You should delete email as it's no longer necessary, but then you should back up your email. And that includes backing up the appropriate background files that are associated with your email. Many times your email database may have your email in one place and file storage of those files in another place, and maybe some other data that's sort of resonant somewhere else. Email signatures, for example, are sometimes in cloud email service providers. I know they are in our Gmail services, both personal and in G Suite. And so I have a backup of those email signatures, and that's just purely because I don't want to have to recreate them. They're just easy to back up. Local and cloud files, again, that which is local, that which is in the cloud, make sure that you're downloading both of them. And passwords, again, client data, again, have a client data retention policy. How much client data are you going to hold? What are you going to back up, and what are you not going to back up? And what are you going to delete over time? Okay, and that's just, really, you need to pay attention to what you're going to keep and what you're not going to keep over time. I just think it's a good practice. And then software databases. So what software do you have? What specialized software do you have? And what databases do you need to keep in there? One thing that many people miss is the mobile device part, which you have a lot of BYOD today, which is bring your own device. Devices that are around. And so you have staff who may have their own cell phone and they're accessing business data, including email, and you want to make sure that those systems are backed up, especially if they are subjected to ransomware or some kind of other attack. You want to be able to have a backup of those devices. Thankfully, most mobile devices today that run Android as well as Apple iOS have both Android's built-in backup as well as the iCloud backup services. If it's a lot of data, you may have to pay for the iCloud backup services or expand your Google Drive storage in order to handle the Android backup, but well worth it. Okay, because that data is now secured in the cloud, and that means you can, get a new phone and then log back in, and that data will be able to synchronize back down to it. So make sure that you are backing up your mobile devices as well. That includes tablets and also any tablets or point of sale, retail point of sale systems that you might have hanging around your store or office. So those systems sometimes have a huge amount of data that they're communicated up to either a cloud storage server or some kind of service provider who is using that for payment gateway and sending you transaction information and all of that stuff. But the local data itself is really important data and sometimes very lucrative data for you to secure. That is, a hacker could get a lot of information about your clients and about your business from being able to get at that data. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and back that up as well. All right, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about data you should not back up. Okay, because I think a lot of times, as I said earlier, you want to be strategic and thorough with regard to your backups, but some data just does not belong in a backup. Okay, and these are them. I see so many clients. I have one particular client. I will not name names, but this client keeps multiple software versions of the programs that this person uses. And so there's like 40 and 50 of the same software on the same hard drive. It's completely not necessary. And if you're looking at a piece of software that ran, 7 or 8 versions of your operating system ago, that's never going to be useful to you again, okay? Honestly, like if you wanted to keep one prior version because you know that it, will help you, great. But there's really very limited circumstances where you're not going to be able to get at the software that you were using before, okay? So if you have something like a very specific industry-specific software, make sure that you have the CD, or you can even image the CD to a backup site. But you could probably get it from the software provider again. It's usually associated with a license, and so therefore you can just reactivate the old software with the new license and be done with it. But software versions of the past really, like 99% of the time, are not necessary. Next up are multiple versions of old databases. Okay, so I see this all the time where clients keep copies of old databases which are like, years and years old. And the data is completely, at that point, useless because it has had such a time between use that data is no longer valid. You know, clients have moved, clients' information's been updated. You know, you have half of your clients in the last 3 years, and those are not even represented in the 10-year-old database. You just don't need it. Get rid of it. Next is the operating system itself. You do not need a backup of your operating system. Okay, many times people keep copies of system files and all kinds of other things, and there I'll talk about in a moment some way that you can do this, but you don't need a copy of your operating system. It's multiple gigabytes of data that really is not necessary. Okay, so don't try and copy your entire system file, all the directories and keep as a backup. Not necessary at all. Okay, do not keep all of your email from forever. Okay, this is something that I fundamentally believe is really important. Speak to business legal counsel about this, but I would imagine that they would guide you about the fact that e-discovery, electronic discovery, and just the nature of our litigious society is that email, if you're going to ever get sued, is the first place that someone's going to go to. And if you have a backup of all of your email from forever, well, guess what? You have just exposed your business to unnecessary litigation risk. Okay, so you need to just decide on what your email retention policy is, and for that matter, document retention policies as well. How long do you keep information about the business? You know, talk to your accountant, talk to your lawyer, get appropriate advice on that, and then set a time frame for your system to automatically purge that stuff. And there may be things that you decide that you do want to keep forever, and that's completely fine. But at least you know and are aware of your risk. Okay, but not all of your email. It's not necessary, you know. Next up is client data you no longer use nor need. All right, now this again, why expose yourself to having all of your email forever and then eventually have that consumed within litigation or a hacker getting access to that and using ransomware and so on and so forth? Well, it's going to be really bad for you to have to come hat in hand to your client with the news that their data has been caught up in some kind of hacking or data loss situation, and now all the data you had about them is now lost or in some way, shape, or form compromised. You do not want to have to come to them and say, yeah, we have every single data point we've ever collected about you in a hacker's hands right now. It's much nicer to say, yeah, we only have the last 6 months worth of data that we collected about you, or the last 7 years, or whatever it is. It's better than all data from forever. Okay, so really keep that in mind. And at that point, you should actually also talk to your business insurance, agent or advisor about cybersecurity insurance and what needs to happen in that capacity. There are policies that cover you for this, but just in case a client does come back to you from data loss and is upset, you do want to know how to deal with that situation, both from a legal, insurance, and other perspectives. All right, finally, you do not back up copyrighted material, okay? Especially if you don't have license to keep multiple copies of that copyrighted material. This happens quite often when you're using backup services like Google Drive or Dropbox or others, where at least on the consumer side of Google Drive, they go ahead and look at that data, and if you have copies of copyrighted material, say that's under DMCA or other kinds of copyright laws, they do have the right and additionally somewhat the obligation, that's a bit more murky, to get rid of those copies. So if you go ahead and quote unquote back it up and then delete it from your local drive, well, Dropbox, for example, will go ahead and delete it. They've taken a fairly aggressive role in protecting, in this case, DMCA stuff, the Digital Millennial Copyright Act. And the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is regarding, songs of artists and movies and those kinds of things. And those are things that can very easily have a false positive. So you could have something named like an MP3 file like Michael Jackson's song, for example. This is another reason why, if you're going to save any material like this, make sure to encrypt it. Make sure to put it inside of a shell, like a zip file or some other kind of archive backup, because then Dropbox or Google or OneDrive, Microsoft, that is, and Apple, they can't actually see the file, because all they can see is the shell that it's encrypted inside of. Okay, so if you are going to keep any copyrighted material, including your own, you want to make sure that you keep it inside of a zip drive, and that you don't that if you don't have a license to keep multiple copies, right, that you also adhere and to the license that you do have. Okay, so that's the data that you should not back up. Let's go forward and just talk about a couple of pointers before we get to tools and closing out. So number one is, as I've said before, encrypt and physically secure your backups. Just very similar to the way I talked about. In my case, it's a very simple, jokingly, it's a metal lunchbox that I keep my hard drive in. It's a padded little insulated lunchbox, and that allows it to be easily carried, and it also is lockable. It has actually a secure lock that I've put on it, and this little insulated, durable lunchbox gives it physical security. No one can access it from by opening it or anything like that without a sledgehammer, I presume, and it gives it a number of different insulative qualities. It's waterproof in this particular case, and it's impact resistant, so that if I drop the case, it's not going to damage the device, and that kind of thing. So you do want to physically secure your backups, as well as, like I said, put it in a safe, waterproof, fire safe safe, and make sure that you lock your safes. If you have one, you should lock the safe. So many people don't lock their saves, and then they wonder why things are stolen from them. Okay, so encrypt them. Make sure that your backups are actually running, and check your backups on occasion. Go ahead and run. They usually have some kind of mechanism in place to verify that the data is actually capable of being restored from that backup. So you can actually go ahead and use your backup utility and say, you know what, let me go check and see if this data is actually verified. And it'll say, yep, this data is secure and it is capable of being restored from that. Note that the things I've talked about today is not, they are not cybersecurity en masse, okay? Making backups is one tool in your toolkit, in your toolbox, that's a part of the larger, cybersecurity realm, or what some cybersecurity experts call cyber resilience. Okay, the ability to bounce back from cyber attacks. This is just one tool in it. So don't think that just because you're doing backups and you're encrypting them and physically securing your backups and making the appropriate timeframes for backups, that you're somehow cyber resilient. This is just one aspect of it. So really do pay attention to other aspects of cybersecurity. I wrote a blog post about this several weeks ago in terms of the various types of attacks, so that you can get yourself addressed to this. I will give that to Tracy, and she can send that out to you all if you'd like, so that you have that available to you. Okay, consistency is going to save your business someday. As I said earlier, this is not an if, but when proposition. At some point in time, you will have data loss or data, stolen, and you will want to make sure that you are doing a consistent backup so that you're capable of reaccessing that data in the future. Okay, so really be consistent here. The more consistent you are, the more likely you are to not, just lose your cool when you find out the data has been lost because an employee accidentally deleted, their email database that had some really important email in it, or, your credit card company calls you and says that, somehow your account has been compromised and they need to, shut down other parts of your access to this data information or whatever it might be. And so therefore you need to look back in your records to figure out, what were your past months, quarters, years charges for your accountant for tax season. That stuff happens, and financial institutions are being attacked on a much more rampant basis. You want to be able to have that information accessed. I think something I didn't reference before, but I really highly recommend, is that you pull down your bank records, right? And most banks allow you to download those databases, download those bank records, and also encrypt and secure those in backups, because they're the ones who are getting targeted as well as small business. And then your data is not accessible, and then tax season comes around, or you have to file some kind of quarterly tax report or monthly tax sales tax thing, and you're stuck because you don't have the data to be able to report that information. Then maybe you have to go back to your point of sale and manually tabulate those things. It can be a real pain. So consistency in saving all of your data will save your business someday. Do it one step at a time. I know it seems overwhelming and there's so many different moving parts. Go back to that main list, right? What's the data that I have, and how am I backing it up locally and off-site, and how often, right? Just make a list of those data points and then stick to it, all right? If you really want to be prepared and you want to go to the next level, there's something called system imaging, and there's software out there that can do this. I know Norton and some others have this idea of the software of being able to create system images. And this actually creates an exact replica of your current operating system on mostly desktops, but some mobile devices as well. And you can actually keep those backups so that if something were to happen, you would actually be able to re-image the computer and it would come back to exactly the state in which the system image was taken. That's if you, some really high stakes situations. If your business really requires you to have the cutting edge backup technology, look to system imaging as a function for being able to stay hyper prepared. And in those cases, you'd probably want dailies done of these system images and pushed up overnight. Okay, so that's just, I wanted to make sure I touched base on that just so people didn't feel like that wasn't available to them. All right, I want to cover some of the tools. These are really simple. Google has something called Backup and Sync and Google Photos. This provides some level of backup in the sense that Google Photos is a backup, but I wanted to people to pay attention to Google's Backup and Sync is not a backup utility it should be named something different. It should just be Google Sync, okay? This is not a true backup. So this is a software that connects to all of your computers, desktop devices and desktop computers, and can take files that you have on your computer and push them up to your Google Drive. Okay, so yes, great tool for being able to get things up in the cloud and have them accessible in Google Drive or on other computers, but it is not true backup. All right, so don't think that this is just easy to set up and therefore it's truly backup. It's not. Google Photos, though, is an actual backup, since it's actually taking those photos from your desktop and pushing them up to the Google Photos server, where it is stored separately from the files on your local system. So I highly recommend both of them, but they are not backup. I recommend that you still install them. Time Machine, if you're on Apple, if you're on Microsoft Windows, basically Vista, XP, Vista 7, 8, 8.1, or 10, go ahead and just use Windows Backup. Connect your external hard drive to your Apple or Microsoft Windows computer and set it up. Tell it how often to set up the hard drives, both for on-site local storage as well as off-site backup, and run with it, okay? Again, make sure that you have your Android and iCloud for mobile setup. Okay, set up those backup utilities, learn about them. Every version of Android is different, every version of iOS is different, so I can't get into the particulars here, but I'll be happy to answer questions if someone has a specific question about those. And I did want to take a moment to let people know that if you are using Google services and specifically G Suite, which is the Google Apps for Business version, Google Apps formerly known as Google Apps for Work. As many of you know, I'm the Google Small Business Advisor for Productivity, and the G Suite Productivity Suite encompasses Google Docs, Google Drive, Google Sheets, Google Calendar, Gmail, and so on and so forth. Google has a function where you can go to takeout.google.com, and it allows you to back up your entire account data, and you can just export and archive, okay? Again, I like separation, so I like to actually export some of these things like email and calendar separately in separate archives, and then encrypt those and back them up separately. You can do what you want, but it can create an archive of these, and I recommend that you do that, especially since most of my data is in G Suite and in the cloud. I want that downloaded copy so that I can save that offsite and in my own cloud storage backup, just in case. All right. For businesses that are looking for backup tools for cloud services. There's CrashPlan for small business, and CrashPlan is a great tool, which is the one that I actually use, and it does a fantastic job of handling backup. There's also Carbonite Business, Mozy Pro, which is Mozy is the company that's owned by Dell. They are primarily consumer grade product with Mozy, but they do have a business level, which is Mozy Pro, and do a very competent job of backups. And Backblaze for business, which is another cloud service provider. So those four are the ones that I recommend in order of cloud-based storage, and they variety of different pricing mechanisms and models. Look at the four of them comparative to each other, and you'll pretty quickly be able to decide which ones are for you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tracy for Q&A and for closeout, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Ray. Really informative session today. Appreciate it. We don't currently have any questions, but I'm going to leave the question window open for folks to ask questions. And while they do, I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar for folks. Thank you all for participating today. Today's webinar was recorded and it'll be posted on the Virginia SBDC website under live webinars and recording. Tomorrow you'll be receiving a follow-up email on this webinar, and there'll be an evaluation link in that email. Please help us to continue to improve our training by taking the time to complete the evaluation. If you want to fill out the evaluation now, I put a link into the chat field. Our next webinar is October 19th, Podcasting Your Way to Profitability. So I think that that's all for today. I don't see any questions coming in the question window. Ray's email is on the last slide, so please feel free to email him questions if you have them after the webinar. Thank you all for participating today.